Testimony is underway in the third week of the criminal hush money trial involving former President Donald Trump. Today, the judge in the case held Trump in contempt of court for violating a gag order. Judge Juan Merchan says Trump violated the order not one, but 9 times, and fined him, well, $1,000 each, total of $9,000. CBS News correspondent Errol Barnett is following this for us outside the courthouse in Manhattan. Errol, you've been there day in and day out. Talk to us about this decision today. This is new news this morning, and the warning to Trump that it's not just about paying fines. He could end up in jail for this.
That's exactly right, Lilia. Judge Juan Merchan now instituting some level of punishment to former President Donald Trump for what he says is a clear violation of 9 instances of the judge's gag order. And as a result, the former president, will pay $1,000 per violation. And he has apparently until 2:15 Eastern to remove the corresponding Truth Social posts and remarks from his campaign 2024.
Okay, so imagine being Donald Trump right now and watching in real time as the people who were supposed to save you in court, your key witnesses, your former aides, the people who swore they'd back up your version of events, completely crumble under cross-examination and admit they've been lying the whole time. We're not talking about minor inconsistencies or memory lapses here, folks. We're talking about witnesses breaking down on the stand, contradicting their own sworn statements, admitting to document destruction, and exposing coordinated efforts to obstruct justice. This is absolutely devastating stuff that you almost never see in high-profile cases, and it's happening to Trump across multiple proceedings at the same time. The scene inside these courtrooms has been described as unprecedented. Prosecutors methodically presenting recordings and documents that witnesses can't deny, judges threatening perjury charges and contempt citations as people squirm on the stand trying to explain away obvious lies, defense attorneys watching helplessly as their entire strategy disintegrates in front of everyone. Legal experts who've been following these cases are saying this level of witness collapse basically guarantees future indictments and makes conviction at trial almost inevitable. When your own witnesses are admitting under oath that they lied to protect you, when they're revealing behind-the-scenes coordination to cover up crimes, when physical evidence contradicts everything they previously claimed, you're done. There's no recovering from that kind of damage. And Trump's legal team has to know they're facing a catastrophic situation that's only going to get worse. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Be inside the lines of what the court will allow. He cannot intimidate witnesses or jurors in this case. No defendant can. And there's also one other aspect of the judge's order. Judge Juan Merchan also writes that the defendant is hereby warned by the court it will not tolerate continued willful violations of its lawful orders, and that if necessary and appropriate under the circumstances, it will impose an incarceratory punishment. So that is the threat of jail time to Trump if he continues to violate the gag orders. Now, for those keeping track at home, we have 9 violations of what the prosecution said were 10 violations, but last week they brought forth another 4. The judge is expected to hold a hearing on that decision on Thursday morning. So we're not out of the woods yet as far as Donald Trump's behavior as a defendant in this criminal case.
Well, let's get back to the trial now, Errol. The court also heard testimony today again from a bank executive, Guy Farrow. Why is he there? What did he have to say?
Well, if you remember, last week's star witness was David Pecker, former publisher of the National Enquirer, who says he was an admirer and a friend of Trump's, and he described the relationship of amplifying positive stories, suppressing negative stories. Now, additional witnesses have backed up some...
Now, let's talk about why this witness collapse is so much more serious than the other legal setbacks Trump has faced, because context really matters here. Trump has survived a lot of legal challenges over the years by using delay tactics, by attacking prosecutors as politically motivated, by having witnesses stick to rehearsed stories that created just enough reasonable doubt to avoid conviction. That playbook has worked for him time and time again. Witnesses who stayed loyal, who maintained consistent narratives even under pressure, who gave Trump plausible deniability about his knowledge or intent. But what's happening now is completely different because the witnesses themselves are falling apart and admitting they were lying all along. You can't spin that. You can't claim it's a witch hunt when your own people are confessing to crimes on the witness stand. You can't maintain plausible deniability when recordings and documents prove you knew exactly what was happening and actively participated in cover-ups. The prosecutors in these cases have clearly done their homework. They've got forensic evidence, they've got secret audio recordings that witnesses didn't know existed, they've got documents that directly contradict sworn testimony. And when they've confronted witnesses with this evidence during cross-examination, the witnesses have had no choice but to admit the truth or face immediate perjury charges that would send them to prison. It's a masterclass in prosecutorial strategy, and it's absolutely destroying Trump's defense because once a witness admits to lying, their entire testimony becomes worthless and potentially incriminating for everyone involved in the cover-up. Here's what makes the situation so wild. We're watching multiple witnesses collapse across different cases and hearings, which suggests this isn't just one person cracking under pressure, but a coordinated defense strategy that's completely fallen apart. Former aides and administration officials who were supposed to be Trump's most reliable defenders are the ones breaking down and revealing the truth about what really happened. These aren't random witnesses with limited knowledge. These are people who were in the room when decisions got made, who participated in the alleged crimes, who have firsthand knowledge of Trump's intent and actions. When people at that level start admitting to document destruction, to obstruction of justice, to lying in previous testimony, that's game over for the person they were supposed to be protecting. And the judges presiding over these hearings are clearly fed up with the evasive answers and obvious lies. We're seeing judicial warnings that are extremely rare, threats of contempt, promises of perjury referrals, public admonishments of witnesses for dishonest testimony. Judges don't do that lightly because they're supposed to maintain neutrality and not show bias. But when witnesses are so blatantly lying that it becomes impossible to ignore, when the evidence of perjury is overwhelming, judges have an obligation to maintain the integrity of the proceedings, even if that means coming down hard on defendants and their witnesses. The fact that this is happening repeatedly across multiple hearings tells you just how bad Trump's legal situation has become. The immediate legal jeopardy that Trump faces as a result of these witness collapses is staggering when you really think through all the implications. Every witness who admits to lying or obstruction potentially becomes a cooperating witness who can provide even more damaging testimony about Trump's role in various schemes. Every document that gets revealed contradicts Trump's public statements and legal arguments. Every recording that surfaces makes it harder for Trump to claim he didn't know what was happening or didn't authorize illegal conduct. Prosecutors now have what legal experts are calling extensive corroboration, multiple witnesses, physical evidence, and firsthand confessions, all pointing in the same direction and telling the same story about Trump's criminal liability. That's exactly the kind of evidence that wins cases at trial, because juries can see it's not just one person's word against another, but a mountain of proof that all supports the prosecution's version of events. Trump's lawyers have to be absolutely panicking right now because there's no good way to defend against your own witnesses admitting to crimes and implicating you in the process. The normal defense strategies attack the credibility of prosecution witnesses, create reasonable doubt about intent, argue that procedures weren't followed, don't work when your own team is confessing, and the evidence is undeniable. We're potentially looking at a situation where Trump's only realistic option becomes negotiating a plea deal before things get even worse, which would be an absolutely stunning fall for someone who's spent his entire life avoiding accountability. Let's dig into exactly what happened during these brutal cross-examinations because the details are absolutely crucial to understanding why this represents such a devastating blow to Trump's defense. According to reports from people who were in the courtroom, prosecutors came prepared with what can only be described as a prosecutorial kill shot. Secret recordings, documents that witnesses thought had been destroyed, communications that directly contradicted sworn testimony. They didn't just ask vague questions and hope witnesses would slip up. They had specific evidence that they could use to trap witnesses in lies and force them to either admit the truth or commit obvious perjury that would result in immediate criminal charges. One particularly damaging moment reportedly came when a former Trump aide was confronted with audio recordings of conversations where illegal conduct was discussed in explicit detail. The witness had previously testified under oath that no such conversations ever happened, that they had no knowledge of any wrongdoing, that everything was done properly and legally. But when the prosecution played the actual recordings in open court, The witness had no choice but to admit they'd lied in their previous testimony. You could apparently see the moment on the witness's face when they realized they were caught, and their only option was to start telling the truth or face years in federal prison for perjury. That's the kind of devastating cross-examination that ends cases, when the evidence is so overwhelming that witnesses can't maintain their lies anymore and the whole cover-up unravels in real time. The coordination to obstruct justice that these witnesses revealed is potentially even more damaging than the underlying crimes that Trump is accused of committing. Obstruction of justice charges are often easier to prove than the original allegations because you just have to show that someone took actions to interfere with an investigation, regardless of whether the underlying conduct was actually criminal. And what's emerging from witness testimony is a pattern of deliberate efforts to destroy documents, to coordinate stories, to intimidate potential witnesses, and to lie to investigators and courts. Multiple witnesses have now admitted under oath that they participated in document destruction, taking materials that were under subpoena or preservation orders and either physically destroying them or deleting digital records. That's textbook obstruction that prosecutors love because it's concrete, provable, and shows consciousness of guilt. Why would you destroy evidence if you had nothing to hide? The jury instruction on that point is devastating for defendants because judges tell juries they can infer guilt from evidence destruction. Same thing with coordinated stories. Witnesses are revealing that there were group meetings where everyone got their story straight, where they agreed on what to say and what not to say, where they specifically discussed how to mislead investigators while technically staying within the bounds of what might be legally defensible. That kind of coordination transforms what might have been individual lies into a conspiracy to obstruct justice, which carries much harsher penalties and is easier to prove when you have multiple witnesses all confirming the same pattern of behavior. The role of forensic evidence in breaking these witnesses cannot be overstated, because it's one thing to lie when you think it's your word against someone else's, and it's entirely different when there's physical proof of what really happened. Prosecutors in Trump's cases have clearly invested significant resources into forensic analysis of documents, communications, and digital records. They've recovered deleted emails and text messages that witnesses thought were gone forever. They've analyzed metadata on documents to prove when they were created or altered. They've used cell phone location data to prove who was where and when during key events. They've obtained recordings from sources that witnesses didn't know were documenting conversations. This level of forensic preparation is what makes the difference between a circumstantial case that might go either way and an airtight prosecution that's almost impossible to defend against. When a witness claims they don't remember something, and the prosecution pulls out an email from that witness explicitly discussing the issue in detail, that's not a memory problem, that's a lie. When a witness says a document doesn't exist, and prosecutors produce multiple copies along with proof the witness had access to it, that's not a misunderstanding. That's perjury. The forensic evidence is providing prosecutors with the ability to prove beyond any doubt that witnesses are lying, which is forcing those witnesses to either come clean or face serious criminal charges that would ruin their lives. Let's talk about the judge's reactions during these proceedings, because judicial intervention of this type is extremely significant and tells you how egregious the lying has been. Judges are generally very patient with witnesses and reluctant to threaten sanctions or criminal referrals unless absolutely necessary. They understand that testifying is stressful, that memories can be imperfect, that people might be confused or mistaken without being intentionally dishonest. But what's happening in Trump's cases has apparently gone so far beyond normal witness difficulties that judges feel compelled to intervene with public warnings and threats. We're seeing judges directly tell witnesses that their answers are not credible, that the evidence contradicts what they're saying, that continued evasion will result in contempt citations or perjury referrals. Those are incredibly serious warnings that judges only issue when they believe witnesses are deliberately obstructing the proceedings. The public nature of these admonishments is particularly damaging because it creates a record that can be used in future proceedings and makes it clear to everyone watching that the court itself doesn't believe Trump's witnesses. When a neutral arbiter like a federal judge essentially calls your witnesses liars in open court, that's devastating for your case because it destroys their credibility not just with that judge, but with any jury that might eventually hear the case. Prosecutors will be able to point to the judge's admonishments during trial and argue that even the court recognized these witnesses weren't telling the truth, which is powerful evidence of consciousness of guilt. The plot details that have surfaced about attempts to intimidate and silence witness testimony represent potentially new criminal charges that Trump could face beyond whatever he's currently accused of. Witness tampering and intimidation are serious federal crimes that carry significant prison time, and the testimony that's emerging suggests there were organized efforts to prevent certain people from cooperating with investigators. Some witnesses have reportedly revealed that they were contacted by Trump allies or representatives and told in no uncertain terms that cooperation with prosecutors would have consequences, that they'd lose job opportunities, that information about them would be leaked to the media, that they'd be ostracized from political and social circles they cared about. This is classic witness intimidation that prosecutors take extremely seriously because it strikes at the heart of the justice system's ability to function. If witnesses are too afraid to tell the truth because they fear retaliation, then investigations become impossible and powerful people can commit crimes with impunity. When witnesses start admitting under oath that they were intimidated or that they participated in efforts to intimidate others, that gives prosecutors new avenues to pursue additional charges against Trump and his associates. It also provides powerful evidence of obstruction because you only intimidate witnesses if you're trying to hide something criminal. Innocent people don't need to threaten potential witnesses into silence. They welcome testimony because the truth supports their version of events. The comparison to other high-profile cases is instructive in understanding just how bad this witness collapse is for Trump. Legal experts who've handled or studied major white-collar and political corruption cases say that this level of witness implosion is extremely rare and almost always leads to convictions. There have been famous cases where one or two witnesses broke down and changed their stories, and even that was usually enough to seal the defendant's fate. But what's happening in Trump's cases is multiple witnesses across multiple proceedings all falling apart under cross-examination within a relatively short time frame. That suggests a few things. First, that prosecutors have incredibly strong evidence that makes lying impossible to maintain. And second, that the coordination among Trump's team was extensive enough that breaking one or two witnesses creates a cascade effect where everyone starts to crack. It's like a dam breaking where one leak turns into a flood because the structural integrity was compromised throughout. Once a few witnesses admit to lying and obstruction, the others realize they're going to get caught too, and their best option becomes cooperating with prosecutors in hopes of getting a deal rather than going down with Trump. We've seen this pattern in organized crime cases where once a few members of a criminal enterprise start cooperating, the whole organization collapses because everyone races to be the first to make a deal. The same dynamic appears to be playing out in Trump's legal battles, and the result is going to be absolutely catastrophic for his defense. So, where does all of this leave Trump in terms of his immediate legal situation and long-term prospects for avoiding conviction? The short answer is that he's in the worst position he's been in throughout this entire legal saga, and that's saying something given everything else that's happened. When your key witnesses are admitting to crimes on the stand and revealing coordinated obstruction efforts, you've lost any realistic chance of prevailing at trial. The evidence that prosecutors now have are corroborated testimony from multiple witnesses, physical documents, recordings, forensic proof of lies and cover-ups, is exactly the kind of overwhelming case that results in guilty verdicts and long prison sentences. Trump's legal team has to be having emergency discussions about whether there's any path forward that doesn't end with conviction, and increasingly the answer appears to be no. The normal defense strategies have all been eliminated by the witness collapse. You can't attack the credibility of prosecution witnesses when your own witnesses are the ones confessing to crimes. You can't argue reasonable doubt when the evidence is this extensive and corroborated. You can't claim political persecution when the proof of criminal conduct is undeniable. The options that remain are all bad. Go to trial and face near certain conviction, negotiate a plea deal that requires admitting guilt, or continue fighting and hope for some miracle that becomes less likely every day as more evidence surfaces and more witnesses flip. The political fallout from these public witness failures is compounding Trump's already catastrophic loss of support within the Republican Party and among the general public. We've talked in previous coverage about how GOP divisions, major resignations, and Trump's own courtroom outbursts have destroyed his political coalition. Now add to that the spectacle of his key witnesses breaking down under cross-examination and admitting to lying and obstruction. Even Trump's most loyal supporters are going to have trouble defending this because there's no way to spin your own people confessing to crimes as somehow being a positive development or proof of persecution. The narrative that Trump has been pushing, that he's the victim of a politically motivated witch hunt, that all the investigations are baseless, that he's done nothing wrong, becomes impossible to maintain when witnesses under oath are admitting to criminal conduct and implicating Trump directly. Republican politicians who were already looking for exit ramps now have perfect justification to distance themselves completely. They can say they supported Trump when they thought he was being unfairly targeted, but now that evidence of actual crimes is overwhelming, they have no choice but to call for accountability. That gives cover to Republicans who want to abandon Trump without facing backlash from the base, because they can frame it as responding to new information rather than betraying someone who deserved loyalty. The prosecutor's position has strengthened dramatically as a result of these witness collapses, and that's going to influence how aggressive they are in pursuing additional charges and how flexible they're willing to be in any negotiations. When prosecutors have a weak case, they're often willing to negotiate favorable plea deals or drop charges in exchange for cooperation or to avoid the risk of losing at trial. But when they have the kind of overwhelming evidence that's emerging from these hearings, they have no incentive to offer anything close to a lenient deal. They know they can win at trial. They know the evidence is strong enough to secure convictions on serious charges. And they know that juries are going to see the same witness confessions and physical proof that everyone else has seen. That puts Trump in an incredibly weak bargaining position if he tries to negotiate. He can't threaten to take things to trial and win, because everyone knows he'll lose. He can't offer cooperation in other investigations, because what does he have to offer that prosecutors don't already have from cooperating witnesses? His only real leverage is to avoid the time and expense of a trial, but even that's limited leverage when prosecutors want to make an example out of someone who's been flouting the law and intimidating witnesses. We could be looking at a situation where the deals prosecutors offer Trump are only marginally better than what he'd face if convicted at trial, which means he has to choose between accepting responsibility now with slightly reduced penalties or rolling the dice on a trial he's almost certain to lose. The trajectory of ongoing investigations is being fundamentally altered by these witness revelations because prosecutors now have leads and evidence to pursue new charges and expand existing cases. Every time a witness admits to criminal conduct, prosecutors can use that admission to investigate who else was involved, what other crimes might have been committed, and whether there are additional people who should face charges. The document destruction admissions alone open up entire new lines of investigation. Who ordered the destruction? What was in the documents? Who else knew about it? Were there other instances of evidence destruction that haven't been discovered yet? Same thing with the witness intimidation revelations. Investigators can now pursue everyone who participated in attempts to silence or threaten witnesses, which could lead to charges against Trump associates and potentially Trump himself if evidence shows he directed or approved the intimidation efforts. The obstruction charges that seemed possible before are now almost certain based on witness confessions, and prosecutors can build out conspiracy charges by showing the coordination among multiple people to interfere with investigations. We're likely to see superseding indictments that add charges and defendants as prosecutors follow the leads that these witness collapses have provided. Trump's legal jeopardy isn't just about the charges he currently faces. It's about the expanding universe of potential charges as more evidence comes to light and more witnesses decide to cooperate rather than face prison time for lying. Let's talk about what comes next in the near term, because the witness collapses we've seen so far are probably just the beginning of a much larger unraveling. Once a few witnesses flip and start telling the truth, the pressure on remaining witnesses to do the same becomes overwhelming. Nobody wants to be the last person standing by a false story when everyone else has already admitted to lying and is cooperating with prosecutors. We're likely to see more witnesses change their testimony, more cooperation agreements, more revelations about criminal conduct that hasn't been publicly disclosed yet. Defense attorneys representing Trump's associates are probably reaching out to prosecutors right now trying to negotiate deals before their clients become less valuable as witnesses. The race to cooperate is going to accelerate, and each new cooperating witness makes Trump's position worse because it adds to the mountain of evidence and testimony against him. The hearings and trials that are coming up in the next few months are going to be absolutely brutal for Trump's defense as prosecutors methodically present all of this evidence to judges and juries. We're talking about witness after witness taking the stand to describe Trump's criminal conduct, documents and recordings being introduced that corroborate every accusation, forensic experts explaining how evidence destruction and obstruction worked. It's going to be a prosecutorial masterclass in how to build and present an overwhelming case against a powerful defendant. Here's the bottom line as we wrap up this analysis of what might be the death blow to Trump's legal defense. The witness collapses we're seeing represent a pivotal moment that fundamentally changes the trajectory of Trump's legal battles and makes conviction not just likely, but almost inevitable. When your own witnesses are breaking down under cross-examination and admitting to crimes that implicate you, when prosecutors have recordings and documents that prove coordination and obstruction, when judges are publicly threatening perjury charges because the lying is so obvious, you've lost. There's no coming back from that level of evidentiary disaster. Trump's legal team knows they're facing a catastrophic situation with no good options remaining. The political consequences are going to accelerate Trump's already spectacular collapse, as even loyalists realize they can't defend someone whose own witnesses are confessing to crimes. The prosecutors have all the leverage now and can push for maximum penalties, knowing they have overwhelming evidence to support convictions on serious charges. The ongoing investigations are expanding based on leads from cooperating witnesses, which means more charges and more defendants are coming. And the public perception has shifted decisively against Trump as people watch these proceedings and see undeniable proof of criminal conduct rather than the politically motivated persecution Trump has claimed all along. This is the end game, folks. We're watching in real time as Trump's entire legal defense strategy collapses under the weight of evidence and witness confessions. The question is no longer whether Trump faces accountability, but how severe that accountability will be and how many people go down with him. The witness collapse marks the moment when Trump's legal fate was sealed, and everything that happens from here is just playing out the inevitable conclusion of a prosecution that has all the evidence it needs to secure convictions that will likely result in significant prison time. Keep watching this story, because the fallout is going to dominate headlines for months as more witnesses flip, more evidence surfaces, and Trump's last desperate attempts to avoid justice fail one after another.